If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what you needed to hear. Because there are stories that were not written for the eyes but for the memory of soul. Thousands of years ago, before the word God existed, man looked up to the sky and he called the stars his brothers. It was said that the sons of Anu came from there, beings who descended enveloped in light, carrying in his hands the fire of knowledge and in his eyes the memory of a distant home. They didn't talk about faith. They talked about origin. They didn't promise miracles. They taught laws. And the world was never the same again. The Sumerian tablets tell that these beings came from the firmament and taught the humanity everything they knew: the counting of time, the course of rivers, the secret of seeds and the weight of stars. But over the millennia, its story was transformed into myth, then into legend, and finally, in silence. The name of Anu, the Father of Heaven, became a forgotten echo among clay ruins. And yet, each fragment of these stories seems to hold something greater than just imagination. Who really were these sons of heaven? Were they gods? Were they masters of flesh and light? Or would they be, perhaps, an ancestral memory of a moment when the human and the divine they touched? And from this union something new, hybrid and eternal was born. Today, as we look at the same sky they looked at, we feel there are questions that science still doesn't know how to translate and that religion has already forgotten to listen. Questions that cross generations like a silent call. Why do we, humans, carry this longing for a place we don't know how to name? Why do all cultures speak of beings who descended from the stars and shaped destiny of Earth? Perhaps the myth of the sons of Anu is not a story about distant gods, but about ourselves, about the instant we wake up and realize that something inside, we do not entirely belong to Earth. Perhaps divine lineage and hybrid descent are just two sides of the same truth, that we are matter that remembers the sky. What if what the ancients called the descent of the gods was actually a metaphor for the descent of consciousness, the moment in which the spirit chose to inhabit the body, to learn, love, and remember? Because perhaps Anu's children are not gone. Maybe they just changed shape, traveling from star to star, body to body, from life to life, waiting for the moment when each of us remembers. Who is? There is something in the air when we talk about them. A feeling, a shiver, as if words were not just sound, but keys. And perhaps, if we open our hearts, we can understand that the ancients were not telling a distant story, but describing a spiritual heritage that still pulses in our blood. This isn't just a dive into archaeology or faith. It's a trip down memory lane of the human soul. Because in the end, the question that echoes is not who Anu's children were, but who are we when we remember that perhaps we are part of them. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may lie here, where myth meets memory, and heaven touches earth. Before time had a name, heaven and earth were still one sleeping body. The ancients called this silence Anu, the living firmament. From him were born the first breaths of creation, beings of light, consciousness, and will. And among them, the oldest were known as the Anunnaki, those who came down from heaven. For the Sumerians, they were not just gods, but cosmic messengers, bearers of a heritage that mixed stardust and divine breath. On clay tablets discovered in Ur and Nippur, Anu is described as the king of constellations, the point where all orbits intersect. Its name literally means sky, and from it emanate the cycles of the cosmos, the harmony invisible that sustains the universe. But what fascinates isn't just the myth, it's the detail. The Sumerians knew of planets that would only be rediscovered thousands of years later. They spoke of orbits, of fixed stars, and of celestial bodies that revolved around an axis. How could they know so much, with so little? The priests said that knowledge was offered by the children of Anu, beings who came from a throne of fire and wind. They descended not as conquerors but as gardeners. They planted ideas, laws, and languages in the human mind. And from the clay mixed with the breath the first man was born, not created by magic, but shaped by the union between heaven and earth, a being made of memory and matter, destined to remember where it came from. Modern science, by studying human DNA, has discovered genetic traits as ancient and enigmatic characters that seem to whisper the same secret. There are codes in us that are not repeated in any other known form of life, as if biology itself held the signature of an origin that transcends the planet. Coincidence? Or inheritance from the ancient celestial teachers who taught them Marios, called of Anunnaki? For mystics, Anu represented the spirit of the cosmos, the father of the stars. Enlil, his son, symbolized the power and dominion of natural forces. Enki, the luminous brother, was the creative intelligence, the guardian of wisdom and waters deep. These three formed the first sacred triangle: heaven, air, and ocean. Together, they began the history of man, not just as a species, but as a expanding consciousness. In the temples of Eridu, priests observed the movement of the stars and translated it as divine messages. For them, the sky was not a setting, it was a language. Each star was a syllable of an eternal text, and understanding the constellations was deciphering God's own thoughts. Therefore, they said that the gaze of Anu was upon the earth, not in surveillance, but in souvenir. He saw the reflection of himself in every living creature. When we talk about the children of Anu, we talk about a lineage that goes beyond the flesh. They were not born from wombs, but from vibrations. Each one had a cosmic function. Some taught the science of sound, others the art of time, others the harmony between body and soul. And as they interacted with early humanity, something unprecedented happened: the awakening of self-awareness. It was the moment when man looked at the sky and recognized himself. Perhaps this is the true meaning of the descent of the gods, the first illumination of human mind, the divine spark touching the clay, the consciousness that folds in on itself and asks, "Who am I?" Since then, this question has echoed throughout the ages, disguised as philosophy, science, and faith. The Sumerians did not write stories to entertain, but to preserve memories. Each symbol was a mirror of the invisible. And between the lines of their myths, what seems like a cosmic saga is perhaps just the symbolic account of the birth of the human spirit. Because when the ancients said that the gods came from heaven, perhaps they were describing something that quantum physics is only beginning to understand: that everything, including us, was born from the same luminous substance, that we came from the stars, and to them we will return. Therefore, when we look at the sky today, we do not do so just as curious. We do it as children trying to recognize the Father's face. The search for Anu is, in fact, the search for the missing link between matter and spirit. And when this memory awakens, man realizes that he was never separated from gods, just asleep within them. But if the sons of Anu taught man to build temples, to measure time and dominate the earth, why did they leave? Why do the tablets speak of a rupture, of a day when the sky fell away from the earth? Could this be the fall of the gods, or the beginning of our own independence? If one day the sky came down to us, perhaps now it is our turn to go up to it. The clay tablets say that there was a time when the sky touched the earth. Anui watched the world with serene eyes while her children descended the columns of light that crossed the firmament, and it was then that the balance was broken. What was unity became distance. What was a memory became oblivion. Among Anu's children, two names stand out as opposite poles of the same destiny: Enlil and Enki. The first, Lord of the Winds, was the arm of order and justice. The second, Lord of Waters and Wisdom, represented compassion and creation. Both inherited the power of heaven, but interpreted the purpose in different ways, and it was from this difference that the tension that would mark the entire history of humanity was born. Enlil saw man as an experiment, a fragile species that should serve and obey. For him, humanity was an imperfect reflection of divine will. Enki, however, saw beauty in this imperfection, potential way. He believed that man could learn, create, love, and one day even understand the gods themselves. It was he who, according to legends, mixed clay and blood, creating the being that breathed with a soul of its own. A hybrid being, half earth, half sky. This creation divided the council of the Anunnaki. Some called her profane. Others saw in it the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, the birth of a race capable of to unite two worlds. Thus man became the point of intersection between the divine and the earthly, a portal alive. But every portal carries the risk of imbalance. When Enlil realized that humans had inherited the gift of choice, he attempted to undo it. The error. He sent storms, disease, and finally the Great Flood. He wanted to erase from the earth the hybrid seed that threatened to overtake its creators. But Enki, silently, acted again. He woke man up in dreams, warned him of danger, and taught him how to build refuge. This story would later echo in other traditions: Noah, Utnapishtim, Deucalion, different names for the same souvenir, that of compassion that survives the wrath of the gods. Perhaps the flood was not just a physical flood. Perhaps it was a symbol of oblivion, a veil placed between the man and his divine origin. After him, the gods retreated into the invisible, and humanity began to walk alone. The sky moved away, but left traces, intuition, dreams, myths, and each of us carries within us a spark of that lost contact. Some scholars suggest that Enki's hybrid children were literal descendants, fruit of crossings between divine and human. Others see them as a symbol of the fusion between spirit and matter, between intuition and reason. In any case, it is undeniable that after this encounter, human consciousness changed to always. The man began to ask, to observe, to imagine. He discovered fire, built temples, traced stars, and all of this can be seen as a continuation of what Anu's children started. In the ancient mystery schools, this moment was called the fall of light, not a punishment, but a necessary step, for only when the light descends into darkness can it recognize its own brilliance. Thus, the myth of the fall of the gods reflects the very journey of the human soul, the path of the spirit that chooses to dive into matter to remember who it is. Anu, the Great Father, watched silently. I knew that the separation was only apparent, that each human experience was a mirror of your own creation. And when man raised his eyes to the firmament again, he would recognize the reflection of the divine within oneself. What we call a hybrid may not be a biological mixture but a fusion of dimensions. The body is terrestrial, but consciousness is cosmic. Within each human being, a lineage of stars pulses. We are the link that unites clay and infinity. So perhaps the true fall of the gods wasn't a defeat. It was a gesture of love, a voluntary descent so that creation could experience itself. When Enki touched the clay, he was not violating the divine order, he was completing it, because a universe that only knows heaven still doesn't understand what love is, and it was love, this power capable of uniting opposites, that gave shape to humans. Since then, every time we feel nostalgic for infinity, it is the memory of Anu's children speaking within us. They are not gone. They became consciousness, a creative impulse, an inner voice. The fall of the gods was the beginning of the rise of man, and perhaps deep down, it is the same journey. The search for a reunion between the creator and the creature, heaven and earth, light and shadow. Between the dust and the star there is a point where the divine and the human embrace. It is there that we were born, and that is where we will return. When the waters of oblivion receded and man raised his eyes to the sky again, something had changed forever. The blood of the gods flowed silently through his veins, not as a physical inheritance, but as an inner impulse. The ancients called this gift Mother, the divine spark deposited in each being. It was the code of creation, a living memory inscribed not only in genes, but in the very consciousness. Today, millennia later, science calls this mystery DNA. Inside every human cell there are fragments so ancient that they defy linear explanations of evolution. These are chains of information that surpass understanding, as if someone had programmed the universe to remember. And perhaps it is exactly that, a sacred architecture encoded by the intelligence that Sumerians called it Anu. In esoteric traditions, Anu's children were not just instructors. They were genetic and spiritual sowers. Every teaching they brought, agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, was also a metaphor, because teaching man to plant was at the same time teaching him to understand the cycle of life. Teaching how to measure time was reminding him that everything that is born returns to its origin. And teaching to write was giving him the ability to create worlds with words, just like the gods create universes with sound. The priests of ancient Eridu said that each human being keeps within himself the seal of Anu, a vibration that resonates between the heart and the stars. It is this vibration that moves us to seek meaning, that makes us look into infinity and feel I miss what we never saw. It is what awakens empathy, intuition, creativity, and love, qualities that are not, they belong to the animal kingdom, but to the spiritual lineage. Biology can explain form, but not longing, and it is in this longing that the divine reveals itself. When man creates, he repeats the gesture of the gods. When he loves, he reestablishes the bridge between heaven and earth, and when he seeks to understand himself, he reactivates the original code. The inheritance of the children of Anu is not in the bones, but in the soul. We are bearers of a memory that spans millennia, disguised in symbols, myths, and dreams. In many cultures, this heritage has been translated in different ways. The Egyptians called it Ka, the Hindus called it Atman, the Christians called it Spirit Saint. All spoke in truth of the same legacy, the living presence of the divine within the human, a metaphysical gene that us remember that we came from the stars and that our destiny is to return to light. The myths describe that before leaving, the children of Anu sealed their teachings in temples and codes, but perhaps the greatest temple was not made of stone, but the human body itself. The brain is like an inner ziggurat, with levels of consciousness that rise to infinity, the heart as the altar where the spirit manifests itself in the form of compassion, and breathing is like the breath that keeps the flame of the divine alive in us. If science seeks to decipher physical DNA, the spiritual path seeks to activate the DNA of the soul. Meditating, loving, forgiving, these are ways of awakening dormant codes. Each act of consciousness expands the vibrational field, bringing us closer to the frequency original of the gods. Therefore, ancient mystics say that true evolution is not technological, but energy. We are memories in the process of reactivation, particles of infinity trying to remember the way back home. And perhaps that is why modern man, even surrounded by comfort and information, feels an inexplicable emptiness. It's the longing for the origin, the nostalgia of a time when we talked to the stars and understood silence of the cosmos. Within us, something still hears that call, the same thing that guided the priest Sumerians to raise their eyes to the firmament. Some scientists claim that humans use only a small part of their brain capacity. But what if the rest isn't inactive, just dormant? And if that is where Anu's heritage rests, the codes of light, the records of wisdom cosmic, waiting for collective awakening? Perhaps humanity's purpose is not to conquer space, but to remember that the same is space in conscious form. Divine lineage and hybrid descent do not contradict each other. They complete each other. We are hybrids because we carry the matter of the earth and the spirit of the sky. We are divine because the universe, through us, becomes aware of itself. And every breath is a reminder of this. The inhalation comes from above. The exhalation returns to the world. A cycle that reflects the self-pulsation of the cosmos. The heritage of the children of Anu lives on, not in the ancient temples, but in every gesture of kindness, in every search for meaning, in every heart that refuses to forget. Because as long as there is someone looking at the stars and asking, "Who am I?" the legacy will still be fulfilling its purpose. The blood of the gods is light in motion. It flows through the veins of time and awakens every time love remembers itself. Time passed and the clay tablets turned to dust, but the questions they held remain alive. Who are we? Where do we come from? And why do we feel this constant absence, as if part of us were still between us? The stars. Modern man, with all his science and technology, lives surrounded by answers and but rarely makes sense. We discovered distant galaxies, deciphered the human genome, created machines that they think and speak, but we still don't know what the soul is. We build towers taller than ziggurats, but we forget to look at the sky with our eyes. Same astonishment as the ancients. It is as if we have inherited the power of the gods, but not their wisdom. Jung said that contemporary man lives in an inner desert, a void that no external achievement can fill. Perhaps it is the consequence of having separated the sacred from life, the spirit from science, the symbol of reality. But the myth of the children of Anu invites us to restore this lost bridge. Because deep down he doesn't talk about distant gods, he talks about forgotten aspects of ourselves. Enlil and Enki continue within each human being. One represents reason, control, the power to dominate the world. The other, intuition, compassion, the desire to heal. These are the two forces that inhabit the psyche, the impulse to build and the fear of losing what control. When one dominates the other, the balance is broken. But when both come together, true consciousness is born, the point at which the human rediscover the divine. The myth then becomes a mirror. The ancients looked at the sky and saw gods. We look within and see archetypes. It's the same face, reflected in different dimensions. Hybrid descent is also psychological. We are made of instinct and transcendence, of clay and light. Every choice, every thought is a battlefield between the human who fears and the divine that remembers. In-depth psychology, the process of individuation, the awakening of inner wholeness, is compared to the journey of mythical heroes. Descend into the shadows, face monsters, die symbolically, be reborn with wisdom. It is the same cycle that the myths of the Anunnaki describe: the fall, the remembrance, and the return. Modern man repeats this journey without realizing it. Each existential crisis is a call from the spirit trying to awaken Anu's code inside us. Spirituality, then, stops being belief and becomes memory. It's not about worshiping gods, but about remembering that we were shaped given by them, and that now it's up to us to continue creating. Every conscious act, every gesture of compassion, is a way of returning heaven to earth. Because if the children of Anu taught man to sow, today it is man who needs sow your own light. Modern science, in turn, begins to touch the territory of the invisible. Quantum physics speaks of energy fields connecting everything, of particles that respond to observation, of parallel universes and subtle vibrations. What the ancients called sky is perhaps today what we call field quantum, and what they called gods are perhaps the universal intelligences that move the matter and spirit. The language changes, but the essence remains. There is something greater that inhabits us and us. Observe from inside. When we meditate, when we breathe with presence, when we forgive, we activate the same frequencies that the priests sought in the temples. The human body becomes the new pyramid, the mind, the new observatory, and the heart, the altar where the divine and the human meet again. Perhaps the myth of the children of Anu was never about beings that came from outside, but about the memory of a consciousness that was always within. They are archetypes of the rise and fall of creation and loss, of awakening and oblivion, and by recognizing them in ourselves, we understand that evolution is not a line, but a circle. In each era, man forgets and remembers, falls and is reborn, repeats the gesture of the gods but with a little more awareness. This is why the contemporary spiritual search is not a return to the past, but rather a soul update. We no longer need to build stone temples. We need to build presence. We don't need miracles. We need memory. Because the true miracle is remembering that everything we seek in heaven has always been there in the heartbeat. The mirror of modern man shows what the ancients knew, that the divine never went away. It just hid behind our own eyes. When man looks within, heaven recognizes him. Because remembering God is remember yourself. There is a moment when silence seems to speak. It is the same silence that echoed between the columns of the Sumerian temples, the same that it hovers. Today, when we close our eyes and feel that something is watching us from within, maybe it's Anu's gaze, not from heaven to earth, but from the heart to infinity. After so much searching, the man realizes that the answer was never in the stars, but rather in the shine that makes you admire them. The sky we look for outside is a reflection of the sky we forget inside, and the sons of Anu, who descend and ascend through the ages, may only be symbols of the movement of the soul between forgetfulness and remembrance, because every sacred story is a coded instruction. The gods who descended taught us how to build, how to cultivate, how to love, but also how to fall and start over. They left an invisible map, drawn not in stone but in consciousness. Every emotion, every thought, every choice is a coordinate on this map, and when we follow these coordinates with presence, we find the same portal that the ancients called it the ladder of heaven. It is not a vertical path, but an interior one. You don't ascend with wings, but with lucidity. The ascension is, in fact, a return, the instant in which the mind becomes silent and the spirit becomes silent, recognizes, when we remember that we are hybrids of earth and eternity, Everything returns to its place. The divine stops being a mystery and becomes experience. Perhaps this is the true purpose of the children of Anu, to awaken in man the remembering that he himself is a spark of creation, that the universe is not a stage for distant gods, but a mirror where the Creator discovers multiplied in forms, and that humanity, upon understanding this, stops being an apprentice and becomes co-author of the divine. Today, as science deciphers the cosmos and spirituality seeks to unite the visible and the invisible, the cycle is complete. Divine lineage and hybrid descent merge into one truth. We are the means by which heaven learns to feel. The body is the temple, the mind is the priest, and love is the sacrifice that gives life back to the eternity. When we breathe consciously, we repeat the original gesture of creation. To inspire is to receive Anu's breath. Exhaling is offering it back to the world. Each breath is a silent pact between the human and the divine, and it is in this rhythm that the soul remembers. There is no separation. There never was. The gods are not gone. They just changed form. They became impulse, intuition, awakened consciousness. They are in every gesture of compassion, in every look that recognizes beauty, in every tear that heals. Because where there is love, there is a trace of what the ancients called immortality. And when the last echo of time ceases, when man finally understands that he will always, it was light disguised as flesh, perhaps Anu would smile, not like a distant father, but like someone who recognizes himself in the son who returned home. The return to heaven will not be a journey, but an awakening, because the paraiso was never above. It was always inside. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul has not yet forgot? If this message touched something in you, subscribe and follow us. Your soul can be remembering the path.